Brother be opening our service with a song that's very familiar to all of us. And later on, I will tell you the story of Jill Jackson Miller, who helped write the lyrics and the melody, to Let There Be Peace on Earth. So may we begin by singing and standing to Let There Be Peace on Earth.
Seated. This is a reading from the Hebrew Scriptures. Early in the morning, Joshua rose and set out with all the Israelites, and they came to the Jordan. They camped there before crossing over. When the people set out from their tents to cross over the Jordan, the priests, bearing the Ark of the Covenant, were in front of the people. Now the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. So when those who bore the ark had come to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped in the edge of the waters flowed from above, and they stood still, rising up in a single heap far off at Edom, the city that is beside Zarethan, while those flowing towards the sea of the Arabah, the Dead Sea, were wholly cut off. Then the people crossed over opposite Jericho. While all Israel were crossing over on dry ground, the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan until the entire nation finished crossing over the Jordan. When the entire nation had finished crossing over, the Lord said to Joshua, "Select 12 men from the people, one from each tribe, and command them, take 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood. Carry them over with you and lay them down in the place where you camp tonight." Then Joshua summoned the 12 men from the Israelites whom he had appointed, one from each tribe. Joshua said to them, "Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan, and each of you take up a stone on his shoulder, one for each of the tribes of the Israelites, so that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, 'What do these stones mean to you?' then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the Israelites a memorial forever." The Israelites did as Joshua commanded. They took up 12 stones out of the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord told Joshua, carried them over with them to the place where they camped, and laid them down there. Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day. The Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests who bear the Ark of the Covenant to come out of the Jordan." Joshua therefore commanded the priests, "Come up out of the Jordan." When the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord came up from the middle of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet touched dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks, as before. The people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. Those 12 stones which had been taken out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal, saying to the Israelites, "When your children ask your parents in time to come, 'What do these stones mean?' then you shall let your children know, Israel crossed over the Jordan here on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you crossed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we crossed over, so that all peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, and so that you may fear the Lord your God forever."
Let us pray. O God, our help and refuge, in our distress we come quickly to you. The shock and horror of that tragic day have subsided, replaced now with an emptiness and a longing for an innocence lost. We come remembering those who lost their lives in New York, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania, as well as those innocents who perished in the ensuing wars. We are mindful of the sacrifice of public servants who demonstrated the greatest love of all by laying down their lives for friends and strangers. We remember those who witnessed to defiant love in the face of violence. We thank you for those who have demonstrated great courage in their witness for cooperation, peace, and mutual understanding when all the world seems to rage with hate. For those you have sent to heal us from our past wounds and woundedness, we thank you, O God. We come remembering, and we come in hope, not in ourselves, but in you. As foundations we once thought secure have been shaken, we are reminded of the illusion of security. And while such things must of necessity change us, may it be for the better, not for the worse. In commemorating this tragedy, we give you thanks for your presence in our time of need. Amen.
Shall we join together in a time of silence, remembering those who were the victims on 9/11, of the wars that followed, of the violence that is still happening everywhere. Let us pray silently. Amen. It's strange to remember the events of that day. A member of my church family in Ohio was in the Pentagon. He was a high-ranking Marine, and he lost his life that day. 3 young men who had just graduated just a couple of years ago from our high school were in the tower until 8 o'clock that morning when their boss sent them home after working all night. People I knew in New Jersey, some perished. Some came home and their families did not recognize them because they were coated with this decimation. I can think of all those things, but I also think of hope. The focus of what I want to say to you is hope. Some people, especially the poets and the songwriters, have said that passion is the strongest motivation of the human spirit. The Holy Scriptures of all of our religions and most of human history would disagree. Hope is far stronger. Hope outlives all of our passions. Hope keeps us going when everything else fails. Hope is faith that is focused on God's future through us and in us. For a generation among us, the worst thing that ever happened was the great despair of the Depression. A decade of problems. Some of us lived through that time without adequate food, clothing, heat, health. People sold apples just to have a meal. 25% of the entire workforce was unemployed. Carl Sandburg, in painting a marvelous word picture of the Depression era, said that hope is a heart-spun word. At Christmas time, in the midst of the Depression, Sandburg wrote these words: "The evening star, inviolable over the coal mines, the shimmer of northern lights across a bitter winter night, the blue hills beyond the smoke of steel mills, and children singing carols of the Christ child, and the songs of Bach being broadcast from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Tall skyscrapers practically empty of tenants, and the hands of strong men groping for handholds, and the Salvation Army singing, 'God loves us.' In the midst of all the troubles, there is always hope." When I think of 9/11, I can think of all the sadness of it, but I also find some wonderful hope there. I've had a lot of people say to me, especially those who were somewhat closer than many to this event, "So where was God? Where was God?" I wept and continue to weep for those 3,000 who died that day, for others who suffered from the after effects of it. But on that day, a school bus got caught in traffic, and the children didn't get to the tower to go up to the top of the tower, that they could look over that marvelous place where I have been. They weren't there because their bus got slowed down, and they did not perish that day. But that was only the beginning. 47,000 people might have perished along with the 3,000 who did. But for a whole variety of stories and accounts and events. Some were in the tower and they were able to get out. Some were in the tower and others helped them out. A blind woman was guided down the floors of that tower by two men who lost their lives but saved hers. But so many were like the three young men from Alliance, Ohio, who by some strangeness weren't in the towers. There was a sign of hope in all of the people who rushed from all over the world, not just this country, to be there, to help, to care, to bring their equipment, their dogs, their rescue skills, and to do all that they could to be of help. They are all signs of hope for me. Now, hope for me is a noun and not a verb. When we think of hope as a verb, we think of things like, well, I hope it doesn't rain, or I hope I get that, or I hope this happens, or I hope my team wins. Verbal hope is wishing for things with your fingers crossed. The qualitative difference between worldly hope and spiritual hope is a trust in God. Even if we don't get what we expected, we know we will get what is best for us in God. It is not all bad news when God is ultimately in charge of our lives. Amen.
This is a piece that I call Today a New Dawn Calls. It has been said that if you control the word, you control the world. Words do have power. Words from a book or a play or a charismatic speaker can motivate the masses to act, to rise up or lay low, to initiate change or perpetuate myths through inaction and tolerance for policies they know to be wrong. Preying on the poor, the desperate, the socially outcast, closing doors and pointing fingers, convinced it's us or them. In the beginning was the Word, passionate and full of life. Then came the voices of anger and of battle, shouting, "Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!" At the end, will there be screams, whimpers, whispers, silence? Is there safety in such silence? Is there any strength in rage? Control the word, and you control the world. In the beginning was the Word. All that we are and might become began with the Word. Words do have power. Sticks and stones can break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Whoever said that was never the target of vicious slurs, racial epithets, ethnic profiling, or so-called colorful euphemisms that are nothing more than the creative use of language to express intolerance and hate. It is, simply put, bullying. And bullying is using the word to create manipulation through fear. Throughout its history, humankind has waged wars of hate upon its own. Country against country, culture versus culture, group against the one against the other. This violence is societal, and this violence is domestic. This violence is sexual, racial, and mindless. This violence brings the night. This violence grips our schools, our temples, our churches, our mosques. Violence can be physical, it can be emotional, it can be psychological. It can be war or a harsh word to a child. Violence ruins our freedom. But violence is a choice. So let us say now what needs to be said, to come together instead of breaking apart, categorizing, stigmatizing, labeling, and limiting what another person or group of people can be or achieve. E.P. Thompson once remarked, "We kill each other in euphemisms and abstractions long before the first missiles are launched." So I ask you, what do you do when you don't fit into the boxes they use to categorize and track minorities? Well, they ask you to check other. Other? I am not other. I am a person. I am every one of us. But I am not other. I am all of you, and I am the uniqueness of me. Did you know that the average American spends 15 times more hours in front of their television than they do reading? And yet we need to hear the voices of our best and greatest writers now more than ever. Walt Whitman, William Carlos Williams, Carl Sandburg. So let us listen closely to the cautionary tales woven in the rhymes of Gwendolyn Brooks. Let us listen closely to the folk song, If You Study War No More, sung by Willie Dixon. Because the burning of books by those who live in fear narrows our vision and limits our possibilities. When the poet Pablo Neruda said to the soldiers sent for him by the Chilean dictator Pinochet, "Look around, there is only one thing of danger for you here, poetry," he was answered with voices of violence, and his poetry was outlawed for 17 years. When you control the word, you control the world. Jazz poet Vernon Fraser said, "Human rights is civil rights." So let's put the words of the Declaration of Independence and Bill of Rights into action and refuse to be bullied by those who would have us cower in a corner in fear. As we come together today and remain in spirit together every day after, let us find our way in peace by embracing the world's many wisdoms. Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin based the U.S. Constitution on the three branches of the Iroquois Confederacy, with one notable exception. The executive branch was often women or tribal elders, and they would often banish warlike chiefs. Black Elk, the Oglala Sioux medicine man, spoke of a sacred hoop and a holy tree, which he saw in a vision as broken, but which could be repaired and made strong because of the strength of its roots. The poet Maya Angelou spoke of the tree 120 years later at President Clinton's inauguration. So how do we honor their vision and help this tree to grow strong? Give voice and birth to the dream, as Martin Luther King asked of us. Imagine, as John Lennon asked of us. Practice kindness as our religion, as the Dalai Lama asked of us. Be impeccable with our word, as the four agreements of the Toltecs asks of us. Tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world, as Robert Kennedy asked of us. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, as John F. Kennedy asked of us. And now in the 21st century, it is time we start to ask, what can I do for my world? Living in a democracy means educating yourself to the facts, hearing and understanding all points of view, and then making an informed decision. The right to vote is a privilege and one of our greatest responsibilities. Every vote counts, even the ones not cast. And we all want to contribute to society, to make a difference, and so many are never given the chance. So today of all days, as we mark with heads bowed a calculated act and the 10 years of responses to it that have followed, let us remember that human beings are not violent by nature, but become violent when their basic needs are not met. The psychologist Abraham Maslow did a study of exemplary people like Eleanor Roosevelt, Albert Einstein, and Frederick Douglass. Safety, love, self-esteem, and education are the keys to self-actualization and maximizing your potential. When people are told they are the other, they live inauthentically and do not live their truth. When you make of me the other, it is easier for you to hate me. And the moment that you hate me, I am no longer safe. Genocide was defined by the United Nations in 1948 as any acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And genocide has taken place in Bosnia, in Rwanda, in Romania, in Armenia, in Cambodia, in Iraq. We will never forget the horrors of Auschwitz, Dachau, and Treblinka, or the murderous acts of September 11, 2001, or the atrocities committed at Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay. But we must try to forgive. And sometimes forgiveness takes decades, and often forgiveness is hard. Dr. King once said, "One who condones evil is just as guilty as the one who perpetuates it." So who will be our heroes? Those who serve power in the accumulation of wealth, or those who will speak out against hate, annihilation, desecration, segregation, war, and prejudice? It is not an easy thing to stand up for the other. When Mohandas Gandhi said an eye for an eye only winds up making the whole world blind, why, he was answered with voices of violence. When Nelson Mandela said the struggle is my life, he was answered with voices of violence. Sometimes change takes decades. Often change is hard. Sometimes forgiveness takes decades, and often forgiveness is hard. Mohandas Gandhi said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." In August of 1963, Martin Luther King was that change. On the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, he gave one of the most moving and enduring speeches in U.S. history. I'd like to ask for your help here. When I raise up my hand, if you could say, "I have a dream," that would be wonderful. The manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. We've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. Remind America of the fierce urgency of now. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. That my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. On September 15th of that year in Birmingham, Alabama, 4 little girls dressed in white, Denise, Carol, Addie Mae, and Cynthia, were killed when their church was bombed. They had just heard the lesson, the love that forgives. The poet Langston Hughes wrote of them, "4 little girls might be awakened someday soon by songs upon the breeze, as yet unfelt among the magnolia trees." It took nearly 40 years to bring all the perpetrators to justice. Sometimes change takes decades. Often change is hard. Sometimes forgiveness takes decades. Often forgiveness is hard. When Dr. King said our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter, he was answered with voices of violence. And on April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, those voices of violence shouted so loud that all the world fell silent. Sometimes change takes decades. Often change is hard. Sometimes forgiveness takes decades, and we know that forgiveness is hard. Forward momentum is often stilled in the face of a cold truth. Violence is the darkest act we know. Its damage cannot be fixed. Its power can only be stopped, but not undone. It is a beast best locked away. Its enemy is love, in whose path it has no hope. It's easier to rise in anger, plotting revenge to take a tooth for the one you've lost. It's easy to point fingers and lay blame. It's easy to talk about them and us. But violence doesn't discriminate. Violence doesn't care about who is the other. We all are the other. Violence feeds on anger, justified or not. It spirals on until someone is brave enough to stand without a weapon and say, enough. That's when the night will end, and that's the time a new dawn calls. A new dawn, when we can say with the Christians, peace be with you, and mean it with all of our hearts. When we can say with the Jews, shalom, and mean it with all of our hearts. When we can say with the Muslims, assalamu alaikum, and mean it with all our hearts. When we can say with the Hindus, Buddhists, and Taoists, namaste, and mean it with all of our hearts. When we can say with the Lakota, mitakwe oya sen, and truly mean all of our relations, no matter their color, their creed, their politics, or their social class. When we can come together to build a monument of stone on the shores of the river of humanity that will last for all time in peace and love and understanding. When we can move past mere tolerance and into acceptance and live in a world where there is no other, but a tribe of individuals working together for a truly common good that lifts us all into the light. When we truly are the change we want to see in the world, then the Dalai Lama's call for compassion will be practiced by us all. Then Black Elk's sacred hoop will have been mended. Then the songs Langston Hughes spoke of will ride upon the breeze, and Dr. King's dream at long last will have come true. Then we will know that the long night is ended, and we will know that we have answered the new dawn's call.
As we continue to lay our stones of remembrance and to build an altar to hope today, the various members of the choir will now share in sacred words and sacred voices from the various traditions of the world.
Who sees all being in his own self, and his own self in all beings, loses all fear. Isa Upanishad, Hindu tradition.
Man did not weave the web of life, he is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. Chief Seattle Native American tradition.
Lift up your hearts above the present and look with eyes of faith into the future. Today the seed is sown, the grain falls upon the earth. But behold, the day will come when it shall rise a glorious tree, and the branches thereof shall be laden with fruit. Abdul Baha, Baha'i tradition.
There is a saying in Tibetan: tragedy should be utilized as a source of strength. No matter what the source of difficulties, how painful the experience is, if we lose our hope, that is our real disaster. Dalai Lama XIV, Tibetan Buddhist tradition.
The day will come when, after harnessing space, the winds, the tides, and gravitation, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And on that day, for the second time in history of the world, we shall have discovered fire. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
I'd like to tell you about September the 11th, 2011, based on 3 stories of people from the past: Jill Jackson Miller, Jacob DeShazer, and Mitsuo Fushcida. Jill Jackson Miller and her husband Cy wrote the lyrics and the words to "Let There Be Peace on Earth," the song that we have sung once and will sing again at the end of the service. When I preached on this song years ago, I wrote her and then later called her a couple of times about the song. I wanted to know what inspired her and how she captured the lyrics as well as the melody for the song. She told me the story when she was in Hollywood in a 3-page letter, and she related that she said it was her hope that this song could bring universal peace to all people. The origin of the song could never be traced, the words that she heard on the radio. Invited to a youth interfaith and ecumenical national conference of Christians and Jews by a black song leader, Bob Collier, 3 weeks after she and her husband wrote the song immediately made an impact. As the last line says, as she wrote me, the song came to be the theme and everybody seemed to be taken by it. They just couldn't stop singing it. She writes, "It's difficult to explain the process of creative flow. One has to tell the story which began in childhood of rejection," as she says, when God took control of her life and she surrendered her life to Him. She was orphaned, abandoned, attempted suicide, and made her own way to Hollywood at the age of 18. She said it's been estimated as many as 25 million people sing this song yearly. It's been used by Danny Kaye and UNICEF as their theme song, Rotary International, and the state of Georgia. When she was living, she said she would write up to 10 hours a day to people wanting to know more about the song, the meaning of it, and the lyrics, and why she wrote it. And all these things she obliged. With the words, "Let there be peace on earth, let it begin with me," it's a story of Jacob DeShazer and Mitsuo Fushcida's story of hate that turned to love, in the story of Pearl Harbor and another ferocious bombing. In December the 7th, 3,077 United States Navy and 226 Army personnel were killed or missing, and 1,272 were wounded. Mitsuo Fushcida was the lead pilot at Pearl Harbor, and as he wrote in his journal, he was more excited than usual when he woke up at 3 a.m., 4 days past his 39th birthday. The sunrise was magnificent as he led 360 planes to Hawaii to surprise and cripple the American naval force in the Pacific. Viewing them peacefully, he said he smiled as he reached for the mic and ordered at 7:49, all squadrons pledged to attack. Like a hurricane, we struck with indescribable fury. During the next few hours, I directly commanded 50 level bombers as they pelted not only Pearl Harbor, but the airfields, the barracks, and the dry docks nearby. He would write, "It was the most thrilling exploit of my career." A picture of him there in October of 1941, a few months before he led the attack. This is a picture from the overhead camera of the plane showing the battleships in Pearl Harbor. West Virginia is the one marked with the yellow star. Of the 8 battleships in the harbor, West Virginia was one of those ones that were sunk. The names below in small print that I don't think you can read are the names of all the people that lost their lives on the West Virginia that date, December 7th, 1941, including many from West Virginia. Enter Jacob DeShazer, who was doing KP duty peeling potatoes at a military base in California. So full of hatred that DeShazer volunteered for a secret mission. On April the 18th, 1942, Bombardier Sergeant DeShazer took off from the aircraft carrier Hornet with his plane named the Bat Out of Hell with Colonel Doolittle's bomber squadron on the first American bombing run and raid over Tokyo. He signed in red pen this 10x8 photo at the start of the Tokyo raid on the carrier deck. This is his picture. When his bomber ran out of fuel, DeShazer was captured by the Japanese, taken to Tokyo, Shangri-La, and tortured. For 2 years, he and others struggled with starvation, dysentery, frozen winter, and baking in the summer without ventilation. During that time, 3 mates were executed, and Bob Metter, a strong Christian, died of starvation. Hatred for the Japanese nearly drove him crazy. His hatred was so violent and so vicious, they had to keep him in solitary confinement. It was soon after Matter's death that he began to ponder the cause of such hatred. What made, he said, the Japanese hate us, and what made me hate them? I was gripped to examine the Bible to see if I could find the secret. I begged my captors for one. At last the guard brought it, but told me it was only for 3 weeks. I memorized parts of it, he said, reading up to 12 hours a day. Read the prophets through 8 times, the Sermon on the Mount, and the first epistle of John. My hatred then of the Japanese, he said, began to change completely. On June the 8th, 1944, I read Romans 10:9. If thou shalt confess the Lord and believe in the heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. In that moment, he says, God gave me grace to confess, forgave, and saved me. How my heart rejoiced in my new awareness of spiritual life, even though my body was suffering so terribly from the physical beatings and lack of food. But suddenly I discovered that God had given me new spiritual eyes, and that when I looked at the Japanese officers and guards who had starved and beaten me and my companions so cruelly, I found my bitter hatred for them changed completely to loving pity. A year passed by with solitary confinement in Peking, sick and starving. I slid onto my knees and began to pray. The guards rushed in and began to punish me, but I kept right on praying, and finally they left me alone. God in that hour revealed unto me how to endure suffering. After the war, DeShazer finished his education, graduating from Seattle Pacific College. He then promptly returned to Japan, this time as a missionary, and helped establish more than 20 new churches. Mitsuo Fushcida, at the end of the war, when his military career was over, returned to his village to farm, but it was discouraging. He says, I became more unhappy, especially when the war crime trials opened in Tokyo. Though I was never accused, General Douglas MacArthur summoned me to testify on several occasions. As I got off the train one day in Tokyo's station, I saw an American distributing literature. Passing by, he handed me a pamphlet. I was a prisoner of Japan, involved with the trials on atrocities committed against war prisoners. I took it. What I read changed my life. It was the story of Jacob DeShazer. The piece I read about was exactly what I was seeking. Since the Americans had found it in the Bible, I bought one myself, despite my Buddhist heritage. In the ensuing weeks, I read the book eagerly and came to the climactic drama, the crucifixion, reading in Luke 23:34, the prayer of Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I was impressed that I was certainly one of those for whom he had prayed. The many men I had killed had been slaughtered in the name of patriotism. That date, April the 14th, 1950, became the second day to remember of my life. On that day, I became a new person. Big headlines appeared in the papers. Pearl Harbor hero converts to Christianity. Fushcida became an evangelist, traveling the world. He visited Spokane 4 times. Billy Graham had him speak on stage in West Berlin. He spoke at the Presidential Prayer Breakfast in 1967. He died of diabetes on the 30th of May, 1976, at 73. It was in 1950 that they met. After DeShazer ended a 40-day fast for revival in Japan, Fushcida came to his home. DeShazer welcomed the new convert, and DeShazer went on planting churches in Japan. Fushcida became an evangelist, spreading messages of forgiveness and peace in his native country and throughout the Asian American communities. Because of one shared Bible, the man who first came to Japan in the bat out of hell returned on the wings of a dove to spread the peace that passes understanding in that country for the next 30 years. This is what happens when peace is truly born in us, and we can let it begin with me. As a postlude, last Friday, I called Reverend Jacob DeShazer's son, John, in Oregon. Reverend DeShazer died in 2008 at 95 years of age. His son said his dad always spoke out against discrimination, racism, and hatred. He always believed we are to love our enemies, and God will do the rest.
Let us pray responsively the litany of remembrance, healing, and hope. Today we have gathered to remember a human tragedy, but we remember not to incite revenge, rather to facilitate healing. To be sought in a memory, whether good or bad, is not a sign of health, but of dysfunction. Today we seek from our respective sources of inspiration the courage to mark our pain by making the choices to grow through it. We have heard witnesses of hope, peace, and cooperation. Now may we embody these virtues in such a way as to perpetuate their witness and leave a legacy of life for those who come after us. May we be united in our common humanity against all forces of injustice, degradation, and inhumanity. May we always strive to be part of the solution and never part of the problem. May we be instruments of peace, healing, and blessing in our communities. Though I am Christian, my brother is Muslim, and we can pray together. In the name of Allah, blessed be his name, the beneficent, the merciful. Praise be to the Lord of the universe, who has created us and made us into tribes and nations, that we may know each other, not that we may despise each other. If the enemy incline towards peace, do thou also incline towards peace, and trust God, for the Lord is the one that heareth and knoweth all things, and the servants of God most gracious are those who walk on the earth in humility. And when we address them, we say, peace, salam.
When
You will notice that the altar we built tonight was made from shards of cinder block. What I want us to remember and what I want us to take from this place, and I think all of us that contributed tonight to make it possible, was the world and life is a beautiful and wonderful place, but sometimes people, whatever reason, for whatever pain that they bear, or for whatever reason that they have to lash out toward other people, they don't always understand that beauty. And as a result, sometimes we can bring a lot of brokenness to one another. And we can refuse to see the common humanity that we share. And we can become captivated by the shade or the color of our skin or the creed that we profess. But what we have testified to tonight, or what I hope we have testified in that song so powerfully witnessed to this evening, is this truth: that when the world gives us broken bits and shards and pieces of cinder block, we will erect an altar of hope, and we will erect an altar of peace, and we will witness to a reality that is greater and more enduring than anything that brokenness can create, anything that hate and destruction can throw at humanity. We have chosen to hear a different call and a different harmony, and to walk and march in accordance to that vision. That's what I hope you take from this place tonight. One of the things that we're going to give you as you leave, I'm going to ask our ushers that I've asked in the beginning, if you would come forward at this time. I think if all four of you will come, we'll just kind of deal with this area. We're going to ask that you take a little piece in this basket that you'll be presented. There's just a little piece of gravel, just a little piece of stone. But you see, these small bits and pieces of our lives, when we bring them together and when we take them together and when we build them together, they amount to great things. And so your task, with the hope that you will take this spirit of this gathering and this spirit of our time of prayer tonight, and you'll go to your homes and your work and your communities, and you'll begin the work of building. that audacious altar of hope from the shards and the broken bits and pieces that people have in their lives, and that you will help this world to be a better place, that you will help to give birth to something greater tomorrow than it was today, and perhaps pass on a legacy to those who come after us so that they can do the same, and just continue to move that hope forward. That's our prayer tonight as we've gathered. For all of the voices and all of the people that have come to make tonight possible, I thank you. And I pray that you'll take the spirit and the hope of this gathering and take it to the places that you find yourself in the coming days and weeks and months and years. As those continue to be passed out, we're going to sing the song we began with, Let There Be Peace on Earth, and we're going to sing it one last time. Hopefully now that you have a little bit of background, it'll mean even more to you. So after the basket is passed and you're able, would you stand, and then we'll sing this song together. So now go, take your stones and your witness and your testimony and build something beautiful in your world. And may the God of us all, the God of many names and many places, bless you and keep you and give you the wind beneath the wings that you need to make the world a better place tomorrow and the days that follow. God bless you, and thanks for coming tonight.